The future is coming, ready or not. And I prefer, and I think most people prefer, that we be ready for it. And that means assuring that we have the people with the skills for the jobs, not just of today, as critical as that is, but of tomorrow, and anticipating that rather than trying to catch up, as we so often do. Industry is evolving rapidly, and we want to be ready for it. And you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican to understand that being ready for it means caring about and preparing the workforce.
For a while, we had a really good conversation going in this country about the American workforce, about what works and what doesn't in education. And now, ironically, as we've learned more and more about what really works in education, there's far less discussion on the political level, whether it be executive or legislative branch, about how we make certain that actually happens in our schools. And we see the results of that. We saw some disastrous NAEP results come out recently. And we know that all translates into people not being ready for the workforce. So this is that critical issue that unfortunately we're not talking about anymore. While the right and left are far apart on so many issues, this is one of those, making certain that everyone, regardless of income level, regardless of background, has an equal opportunity to have a shot at a great job. You know, where are you going to find the political difference in that? Now let's go talk about how we do it. And that's why I'm excited about this commission. We're going to talk about how you actually do that.
BBC created the Commission on the American Workforce to bring together stellar leaders from across the continuum, because we know that our economy can't grow, our country can't prosper unless we all come together around the talent pool of our citizens. That's why we're here. We all share a belief that without a high-quality education, you cannot be successful in work, in life, in your community, as a citizen. And that's something that we all share, and why we're working so hard on these issues, to bring urgent action around the needs of the American people.
Almost every time you see an analysis of the future of American prosperity, it begins with the realities of having a trained, capable, productive workforce. And that's true not only at the national level, but at cities and counties and states, everybody pulling together to get the maximum we can from the quality of our workforce. This is the main play for our country. And our economy will only suffer, our competitive position will suffer, if we don't work hard to generate the absolute best workforce that we can.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Cheryl Oldham, Executive Vice President at the Bipartisan Policy Center, where I lead our Human Capital Program. Welcome to the third event in our America's Workforce series. Today, we're focusing on Workforce Pell, a major new expansion of Pell Grant eligibility included in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. For the first time, Pell Grants will cover high-quality, short-term education and training programs. This is a long-awaited bipartisan achievement, and the next step is implementation, making sure the provisions work as intended to help learners and workers gain the skills needed in a changing labor market, while also creating clear pathways to economic mobility. Let me highlight just a few of the key changes. Eligible programs can now be as short as 8 to 15 weeks, including non-credit options that prepare students for in-demand, high-wage jobs. Workforce Pell, like traditional Pell, is limited to low-income students, but eligibility now extends to those who already hold a bachelor's degree. Grants are prorated based on program length, making awards smaller than the traditional Pell Max. Programs must meet quality benchmarks, including a 70% completion and job placement rate, plus earnings thresholds. This will likely require institutions to strengthen data collection and reporting. And to help us unpack what all this means for students, states, and institutions, we're joined by a terrific panel. Dr. Chandler LaBeouf currently serves as the Vice President of Education for Louisiana Community and Technical College System. In this capacity, he has oversight of enrollment management, student affairs, academics, workforce development, and governmental affairs. Chandler has also spent time in proprietary education and private education management for multiple states and is a national leader in online learning. Dr. Kelly Valories is the Chief Workforce Officer for the state of Connecticut. In the Office of Workforce Strategy, she leads the implementation of the state's first strategic workforce development plan. Kelly is the owner of 2 manufacturing companies, where she served as president and CEO for 14 years before stepping down to assume her role with the state. Dr. Mark D'Amico is professor of higher education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and he co-leads the state non-credit data project in partnership with the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers University. Mark's 30-year career in higher education also includes service as a past president of the Council for the Study of Community Colleges. And moderating this conversation is Paul Thane, co-founder of WorkShift, a new site focused on whether education and training are delivering the skilled talent and economic opportunity that society needs. Paul, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all our panelists, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Cheryl, and thanks to BPC for hosting this webcast on a very important topic. Not surprisingly, a lot of interest from folks and a lot of questions, good questions. But as a result, we're going to work your questions into the discussion here and not do a Q&A just to make sure we can hit as many points as possible with this excellent panel of experts. So as Cheryl said, this is a long-awaited federal policy, but the states haven't been waiting. They've been investing in short-term credential programs increasingly in recent years. HCM did a study that found that 31 plus states have invested $5.6 billion already in these programs. And just to give you a sense of the scope of Workforce Pell, obviously an enormous change, but since we're a bipartisan, nonpartisan panel here, I'm going to quote the Congressional Budget Office, one of our remaining nonpartisan organizations in Washington, that says we're looking at about $300 million invested in Workforce Pell over the next 10 years. So not a huge amount of money. It could be much larger. We'll see, and a lot of what happens in the next year and a half will determine that investment. But Mark, we're going to start with you. Not an easy task, but I hope you could just set the stage a bit for us. Give us a sense of what sort of programs will be eligible, how we got here, and what's next in this process.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Paul, and thanks to the BPC for hosting today's event. So short-term or non-credit education really takes a lot of forms. You know, in community college is a sector where I worked, and I think where a lot of non-credit and short-term programs take place. Colleges are meeting local needs and regional needs and state economic development needs, and doing that in a lot of different ways. And the short-term programs are incredibly flexible in terms of ways to do that. I think most relevant to this Workforce Pell conversation is the occupational training for individuals to gain skills that match current workforce needs. So, I think the hope is that individuals earn credentials of value in relatively short-term packages, that they're able to gain some positive employment and earning outcomes, and perhaps even have an on-ramp to additional education. So, while non-credit and short-term programs do occur and are offered across higher ed sectors, I do think it's especially relevant for the community colleges. The current estimate that I've seen is around 4 million students a year are completing non-credit education within community colleges. And when we think about Workforce Pell, which is potentially a sustainable need-based source of funds for students to participate. I think it's important for us to also think about funding structures that occur within state policy. I think it's an important part of this context. For instance, across the states, across the US, there's such a wide range, everything from state formula funding, just like the credit side of the house, to special initiative workforce development funds. You already alluded to some of that, Paul, and the increased investments over time. And there are some states that have no state investments in non-credit and the short-term piece whatsoever. So I think basically what we have here is Workforce Pell with the potential to put some of these shorter-term skill-based programs within a need-based context. The idea being that Pell-eligible students will be able to participate in these programs as short as 150 hours and 8 weeks, as Cheryl was describing. The details, though, are in the fine print. There's a series of guardrails that perhaps we'll explore through this conversation here, that define program eligibility criteria, where it's really going to determine what programs are eligible. But I think, how did we get here? I think there's demand. There's demand in terms of employers wanting individuals with skills, but we also know from some work that Strata did through the pandemic and just after the onset of the pandemic, is that an increasing number of adults that are looking for further education are looking for a non-degree option. And short-term programs, that Workforce Pell could address can really help to facilitate that need and meet some of that demand and provide that access. Of course, Workforce Pell has been proposed many times over many years. Of course, we're thinking with this new legislation, it's proposed that it's going to be starting and implemented by July 1st, 2026. In terms of what's next, I think there are a lot of unknowns that need to be known. I also think there's a lot of heavy lifting within states to dig in and pre-identify which of these short-term programs are going to meet the requirements. There are a couple of challenges that linger. Non-credit data aren't nearly as robust as credit data within states. A lot of that data is often tied to funding, and when funding is less consistent, data is less consistent. Also important to this context is that we have no federal data reporting on non-credit enrollment through iPads. And so, I think that's going to put a lot of the onus on states to be, using their data to try to see which programs are going to be eligible. I know in terms of the next steps, a negotiated rulemaking process is set to begin on Workforce Pell in late 2025. But I think the sense is that states must start preparing now, but also be keeping an eye out for these additional details to emerge, to gain a better understanding of, who will be calculating the measures, what states need to do, and such.
Great work, Mark. Thanks for that. Good news here. We have two states that are ahead of the curve. Kelly in Connecticut, we've seen the Career Connect initiative really pushing into this space. And Chandler in Louisiana, I believe this is correct. The community colleges that you represent have expanded their short-term programs so much that students enrolling in those programs outnumber those in traditional degree programs. But Kelly, we're going to start with you. And one of the things I'm most excited about your perspective is that you speak from a state workforce system, but also as a manufacturing employer yourself. So can you give us a sense of the state's strategy at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. Really been focused on how do we expand our short-term training programs. These are so important because there's so many people who don't see themselves as being a community college student or feeling that they have the success rate to be a college student. We also want to make sure that we're preparing our young students early so that they can be prepared for life after work, earning industry recognized credentials while they're still in high school, and also really focusing on those who are unemployed and underemployed. And that's been a major strategy with the Career Connect funding. So the governor and the legislature focused and invested $70 million of ARPA funds into Career Connect. And we were really intentional when we built those programs out to ensure that we were really focused on first engaging businesses and understanding what businesses needed and when they needed it, and building out those academic programs that met those needs. Also making sure that we were targeting the right populations. We did a big outreach campaign called our You campaign, ensuring that people could see themselves being successful in many different occupations that they might not have even understood existed for them. And then making sure that we work really closely with our community college system and other community providers so that our programs were really relevant and prepared our participants well, and that we set high bars for completion and employment ratios. On top of that, we provided a whole banquet of supportive services that help remove any of the barriers that participants had in being successful. So we covered everything from, your normal childcare and transportation, but we covered the cost of supplies and technology and then transportation and things like that. So over the course of that investment, we trained almost 7,000 people over a 3.5 year period of time. The other important thing we did was create a system, a statewide recruitment portal that also helped with navigational tools and connectivity to case managers. And that really allowed us to have a wide a net to catch people and be able to serve them. The biggest problem with that is that we were so successful that over 40,000 people have come into the portal expressing interest. We fully qualified 3 times the number of people that we had the funding to train. So short-term workforce Pell is really important to our state and helping us be able to serve all of those that are ready and willing and able to participate in the workforce, but just needs that credential to get them started.
Great stuff. Thanks, Kelly. Really fascinating, the demand you're seeing. Just very briefly to follow up, I think a lot of folks, as this debate shaped up in Washington over the last, 8 years or so, positioned the short-term credentials kind of in opposition to the traditional degree. I think in a lot of cases, and probably your state, for a lot of the learners who are interested in pursuing these credentials, that's not the case. This wasn't an either or situation. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. So all of the short-term credentials that we're working on, there is a intentional opportunity for us to stack them to credit. So for example, in our manufacturing program, the Manufacturing Pipeline Initiative in Eastern Connecticut, students who complete the short-term training programs that last between 5 and 10 weeks earn up to 9 college credits. And so we want to take that model and expand that to all of our industry recognized credentials of value. And we're getting people not just a credential to get into the front door or at the front door of their career ladder. We want to get them started on the educational pathway necessary to move up that career ladder.
Thanks for that, Kelly. Chandler, thanks for being patient. I know your state has done a ton of work here. Can you give us a sense of where you have invested and how you've implemented those programs?
Yeah, I appreciate the time for being here today. So thank you again for allowing Louisiana to be a part of the panel. Just to set the stage a little bit before we dive in deeper, Louisiana has 14 community and technical colleges in our state, and 12 of those are within Louisiana's community and technical college system. So we work in partnership with all 14, both locally, regionally, and statewide, and making sure that we're able to provide the opportunity for individuals in the communities, but also our work around the short-term training really was central to our mission and our workforce strategy, and making sure that as we knew individuals in our state and our industry partners were looking for community colleges to lead the way, our system said we're going to be the system who really invest our time into building the talent and strategy for the future generations to come. And with that, our state has invested over 60 million in the last 4 years in the efforts towards helping individuals get these credentials and into the workforce. We've identified 5 industry sectors that we work from as a framework. That's construction, healthcare, transportation, logistics, IT, and manufacturing. And under that, we do that in partnership with Louisiana Workforce Commission and Louisiana Economic Development, who have a say in understanding what the workforce needs are and what the economic development framework looks like from a state. We, as a system, about 5 years ago, migrated our non-credit short-term credentials and programs into our credit student information system to prepare for the comment that was made earlier around where data gaps do exist. How do we make sure we have the data to show the success that we have models out there will be successful. So the last decade or so, as the conversation started about 10 years ago, around really the efforts to see Workforce Pell become a reality, 5 years ago, when we started to embark on greater conversation and framework, we moved and migrated into that one data system and information system. With that, we built out 4 separate programs that really allowed us to showcase the efforts, but oftentimes, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, we were providing as much as we could to Congress around here's the framework, here's what we've done in healthcare alone. So in healthcare, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've completed an additional 9,000 individuals who were in short-term training programs alone, who were funded through this support and the efforts. We had the same efforts mentioned from Connecticut around the wraparound services and transportation and supporting food insecurity and all the other resources to make sure students were successful outside of the classroom so they could be successful in the classroom or in the training labs. We took advantage as well on the heels of COVID when our largest population in Louisiana, in New Orleans, was working in hotels and tourism and hospitality and found themselves unemployed or underemployed. So we launched a campaign called Reboot Your Career. And we built that as a framework truly around a short-term training model, moving programs that were not already within 8 and 15 weeks into that framework in anticipation that one day Workforce Pell would come and that we were poised and ready. And that's how we've ran the Reboot Louisiana model. That's how we've run the broadband training initiative. That's how we've run our healthcare and rebooting healthcare training initiative for our industry partners. And some of that with our Promise program here today. When it started, it was not eligible for short-term non-credit programs. Today it is, and those programs are aligned as well. And so we've done 3 major campaign initiatives as well over the last few years so that individuals know which programs are available at which institutions in their communities and the opportunities, not just about the programs, but how they get access and what resources are available for the individual to be successful from a funding standpoint and a wraparound services standpoint. So we're super excited about the reality that Workforce Pell is now going to be available and allow us to continue to train and educate so many individuals in our state and be a partnership in our workforce and economic development work. That is really a part of our mission. But we also know there is a lot to be worked out. And so we're going to continue our efforts in partnering with the right key players to make sure that we can work together in a committee, a task force, so that all agency players know that we are framed and poised at the time that it is ready to say go.
Thanks for that, Chandler. Obviously, you all have done a lot in Louisiana, but it's a short timeline till next year, and quite a bit of latitude and flexibility for states, it sounds like, in this legislation. At the very last minute there with the parliamentarian drama, accreditation status was added as a requirement. So a little bit less latitude than you might have had in terms of the providers who could be eligible, but still a lot. Can you give us a sense of what will need to be done in a state like yours that has a good kind of framework in place? What are some of the key areas you're going to be working on?
So for us, it's about understanding the framework of the policy that was passed in the One Big Beautiful Bill, and that our Workforce Commission has what they need to be able to make sure the programs that we are training and educating individuals into and graduating them out of, that they are aligned to the industry, that we have partnership with our governor's office so that they're aware of what we need to advocate for today. If there are guardrails and barriers that are in place, that we need to make sure that the negotiated rulemaking is brought to the forefront so changes can occur where flexibility may need to occur, as mentioned, as well as making sure that our economic development teams understand that this work will only be a bridge for them and the industry that does come in or expand to get them that workforce. So it isn't just the 14 community colleges coming together and saying, which programs do we have that align today? Which programs do we need to get aligned? And what does the accreditation component look like? What is the federal sort of Pell framework from the aid standpoint look like? It's bigger than that, but we want to create a small task force slash committee of the key players that's mighty, that makes sure that those dots are connected. And for us, that is the next steps. It's less for us probably looking at program inventory and going, wait, we need to get these within the clock hours or the eligible weeks because we feel like we have that inventory pretty strong. It's more about the policy and strategy piece behind the scenes to make sure that the key players are ready and synchronized together when 2026-27 gets here.
Right. A lot of different agencies at play, as you say. Kelly, in Connecticut, where do you stand now and where do you need to get in the next 12 months or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have an updated state strategy that we released in April, and we're very excited about that because it really has been a state effort. We spent a year ensuring that all of our partners and our education institutions are fully aligned in that strategy. And a lot of it really is focused, again, on career ladders that start from non-credit and move up to credit. We are also part of the Lumina Foundation Future Ready States. So we're excited about doing that work and learning with other states across the country on how are we really going to start to assess an industry recognized credential of value and be able to put that certification on that and ensuring that we have that business support behind it. We've also been convening a career pathways and educational committee under our Governor's Workforce Council. And that group is made up of members from the State Department of Education and our public university and community college system, and really been robustly talking about industry recognized credentials and how we start them earlier and provide more opportunity. And those things together have really helped us move that ball forward. But we also have a lot of really strong experience on industry recognized credentials. And so working again to understand what is that rubric that we're going to be putting in place? How are we going to manage the process of recognizing a credential and then being able to certify that credential? But I think one of the other big pieces that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention is Connecticut has 14 regional sector partnerships. And we started these partnerships almost 4 years ago and have grown them. So we really are in a great position of how we systematically connect with our businesses across the state. And we've been pulling in all of our support partners. So the difference between these sector partnerships and maybe an association, say a manufacturing association, is that the businesses are at the center and all the support partners, there's nobody selling insurance or marketing campaigns. It's all around what does the businesses need to grow and succeed in their region and getting collective demand. Right? As an institution or an agency, you can't respond to the demand of one organization, but we can most definitely respond to the collective needs of those organizations. So it started when I had my manufacturing company's hat on and I went out to in many cases, my competitors in the region and said, we all need to work together on building out a talent pipeline for ourselves. We have to put away the competitiveness that we have over customers and really need to solve the talent gap. And by getting all of us in a room working together, working with the community colleges and really understanding what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed, we need to put that together so that they can build their programming after that. But I think one other key success to our story, especially as it sits in manufacturing, is understanding that our businesses and our academic institutions don't speak the same language. And so you really need an interpreter. And when I started, when I was in the midst of my business, I was that interpreter. I have a foot in academia and a foot in industry. And we've been able to replicate that in Connecticut in healthcare and in IT. So we brought in interpreters who can then have those conversations with both, bring those organizations together, and really be innovative. And it's really been eye-opening to our academic institutions. A lot of ahas that we see in the room when we get them in front of their business partners.
Well, Kelly, it sounds like we need more people like you helping to bridge that divide. I'm really glad you brought that up. I mean, obviously, short-term credentials aren't going to work out if they're not speaking to employer demand. And I also love that you mentioned the kind of collective voice and need piece, because I think I'll speak for myself. I do a better job of reporting on big companies, not the smaller and mid-sized employers who we need to know a lot more about what they need. All right, Mark. So you've heard from two states, kind of where they are, what they need. Can you talk a bit about other examples of states, if you've seen them, where people might draw from in terms of getting ready, and where you see some of the biggest gaps, frankly?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we just heard two great examples. I mean, Kelly and Chandler laying out where Connecticut is, where Louisiana is in terms of momentum and strategy. I think those are going to be absolutely critical. I do think we need that. This only works as states are prepared to get their programs, approved to be offered. So like any latitude or flexibility, to use, a couple words that you threw out earlier, Paul, it only happens if programs get approved. And again, we just heard from two states that have momentum and probably have the data and the track record and the partnerships in place to do that. So, back to this idea of guardrails. A couple of these, and I know Cheryl talked about some of them, but it's important that the governor or the governor's designee verify that programs are aligned with the high skill, high wage, or in demand areas. So, I mean, that needs to be established. That's very much a part of this workforce ecosystem too. That offerings match employer hiring criteria, that the credentials are stackable and portable, that, Kelly talked about how some of these articulating to credit, and I'm so glad to hear that's happening in Connecticut. That is not the norm, but we're going to see more and more programs having that opportunity, within states over time, in addition to some of the other outcomes. So there is this whole ecosystem around the program eligibility and making this a success, and one thing is getting programs approved. The other thing is making it a success where individuals who are going to be able to take advantage of Workforce Pell are going to want to enroll and have these really strong outcomes, to improve their lives and ultimately help the economy. We've seen, as a part of our project, the State Non-Credit Data Project that I work on in partnership with the Rutgers Education and Employment Research Center, that there are varying levels of readiness, of positioning, if you will. And one thing, and I will throw out a couple of states who, I think are in pretty good shape. But one thing to think about is, program length. And so just data from our 8 partner states, we have medians across these states. There's one exception, but generally the median program length that we've seen across our 8 partner states is between 15 and 100 contact hours for their occupational non-credit. So I think that's something to consider in terms of the robustness of programs and whether or not states and systems and colleges are offering the types of programs that will be Workforce Pell eligible. So I think that there's a certain amount of what's being offered that's also an important part of the conversation. So in addition to Louisiana is one of our partner states. So glad to see Chandler on here. But a couple other states that do this pretty well are, in terms of data and offerings, are Virginia with their Fast Forward. They already have state funding for workforce relevant programs that lead to credentials and a unique mechanism there for funding. Iowa also has a lot of data. They're tracking their labor market outcomes and such. So So I think there are points of momentum in a lot of states in terms of working to meet the workforce needs, but I think there's also going to be great variability in terms of preparedness to have programs approved for Workforce Pell because of data and all of the partnerships that are in place to, with workforce agencies, with, other government offices to have connection to all the labor market credentials and such. So I think there are lots of complexities within this ecosystem. One is being a great educator and preparing individuals for the workforce. Another is having, the data ready to be able to navigate, the rigor of this legislation to ensure that students are going to be able to be a part of it.
Thanks, Mark. I want to get to data, but first, let's talk about the guardrails a little bit, and I'll give everyone a chance to weigh in here. One of the most common audience questions I'm seeing is, how can we make sure that bad actors don't have access to this money? I covered the for-profit college wars, so we've all kind of seen this debate shake up. And I have to say, firsthand reporting, the Republican leadership of the Education and Workforce Committee was very sincerely concerned about making sure that this bill did have high guardrails. Folks might not think they got high enough, but to be honest, I have not heard that argument very much. I think the bar is pretty high, saying this is a layperson outside observer, and partially because I think the CBO estimate is relatively low. Mark, I love throwing you softballs. So I want to say again, what do you think of those guardrails? What are you hearing about them? Concerns, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I do think they're robust. You know, because, back to this ecosystem idea, first of all, there have to be a lot of people and agencies and organizations involved in this vetting process, even before it gets to federal approvals. I mean, I think when you have higher ed, you have state government, and then you have the holders of different credential data and labor market outcomes. There are going to be lots of hands in this to be looking to identify, the programs along, pretty rigorous standards. I do think, and I know I've thrown out some of these words, before, but to have the association of credentials that are stackable and portable, I think one of the concerns is that over time, and there's been research about this, that maybe not all short-term programs, are of sufficient quality. And, and I wouldn't disagree with that. I think the research has shown variable outcomes or mixed outcomes or limited outcomes. But when you look at associated credentials, and then you think about this idea of articulation into credit, it then eliminates one of those concerns about short-term programs being a dead end, not leading to other things, because we see the difference in labor market returns between shorter-term credentials and longer-term credentials like degrees. Well, if one leads to the other, then hopefully it allays some of those concerns. Also having, one of the measures that's often thought about is the post-completion job placement rate. And when that's built into the guardrails, at least I'm hopeful that that's going to be a safeguard to ensure value for participants. And also, frankly, for all of us essentially as taxpayers who are going to invest however much it ends up being, 300 million, or so, over time. So I do see the guardrails as being pretty robust. I've already thrown out, that one measure in terms of length, where, I don't see the floodgates just automatically opening to all non-credit programs. I think there is going to be a lot of vetting that takes place. Also, the accreditation provision that was put in, I know, eliminated many of the concerns. So I guess I hear in conversations that I'm a part of, Paul, more concern about meeting the guardrails than concern that there is going to be, too many programs right now being approved. But I think we're going to know a lot more in a year. That's a bit of a cop-out answer there at the end.
No, it's a good answer, and I'm relieved, frankly, that my sourcing gels with yours. Kelly, Could you give us a sense whether you think those guardrails are high enough, whether, some valuable programs in the state might not qualify? Just generally, do you think they hit the mark?
Yeah, I think the guardrails are really good. They're solid, but I think it's going to really be up to the state and the programs to really monitor and evaluate what we're doing. So I think for us, you know, making sure that we're building out that front end navigation system that provides the accountability so that participants go looking for these different opportunities, understand what the outcomes are of each of the programs that they have to choose from, right? So that selection based on accountability at the end of job placement and retention, I think in getting the public to understand that is important. Assessing people in their basic skills prior to starting training programs, I think is also important. And we do that with our Career Connect program, a simple assessment to understand if they have the basic skills necessary to be successful. And if they don't, ensuring that you're providing them with the remediation that they need to set them up to go into those programs. I think that's another important aspect of it. And then, a lot of times we measure, how many people got trained and how many people completed. In Career Connect, we're measuring how many people got placed, and we're looking at placement over the long haul as well. And I think that, that is a really critical component, and we need to have the data management systems to be able to do that and understand completion and longevity. The other part that we're working on is with our employers to understand that there isn't just middle skilled talent floating around out there looking for the next opportunity. They have to build middle skilled talent. So these short-term credentials are a great way to bring people into the front door, but then to partner and support our businesses with incumbent worker training through either additional credentialing and then stacking that credential into credit and degrees. And I think we're really focused, again, on that stackable credential piece to this. But at the baseline, data drives every decision making. So one of the other things that we did in Connecticut this last legislative session is we required our workforce boards and our community colleges to provide data on a regular cadence to our long-term research arm, which we call Data Link CT. And we will be having annual reports on program outcomes. And that gives a lot of accountability to people, because if you're not meeting those standards, then that's going to be part of our credential of value in determining what is going to be eligible for Workforce Pell. And that's where it all starts, at the data and the outcomes.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks to you all for being patient on my data question. And I just want to reinforce what Kelly and Mark said about stackability and portability. That does ameliorate, I think, a lot of the worries about short-term credentials. And for folks who don't know, and I'm sure most of our audience does, it's not been the norm in American higher education, to say the least. So it sounds like you all are really breaking some new ground, frankly, in making sure that learners aren't wasting time and money as they pursue these on-ramps, as we like to call them. So Chandler, the rest of the audience couldn't see this, but I could. You were nodding a lot when Kelly was talking. Anything you want to reinforce that she said? Anything you want to add about Louisiana?
Sure. One is the comments made. I certainly echo them and know that that is some of the work that we're actually doing and conversations that we're having as well to make sure that the accountability piece is in place. For Louisiana, when we look at the potential guardrails, we may say, and some may say, well, we've been doing this work without some of those guardrails, and now we may have a challenge. And what we keep saying is, no, now we have an opportunity. And the opportunity is that this is going to make our state stronger. It's going to make our agency partners a lot stronger as well in our work, and allow to make sure that what we're doing, there is the measure of accountability, there is the quality of data, and then there's the quality of programs in which we are offering the validated skills and learning and the credential value. Some of that work we've already framed out with our coordinating higher education board here in Louisiana. But more importantly, I often say too, and even when we were advocating for a passage of Workforce Pell with the Senate Help Committee, there was a lot of conversations, as we know, about the proprietary institutions and those, the accessibility and maybe not having the accountability. And oftentimes I said, we may be providing quality programs and have really our industry partners lock in step. So what we're training, we're producing quality graduates to enter the workforce. But there are things that we can learn from strategy, from proprietary. They have certain things figured out, the job placement being one, the other, the onboarding processes. And so it's about how do we build those guardrails that everybody has to live within, that are positive, and that everybody is focused on that mission of providing the quality programs and getting individuals into the workforce, no matter which institution they choose to embark on their training journey. And so we're just excited about what the opportunity this will bring. But again, I wouldn't say we've heard anyone state that we need more guardrails. I think people recognize these are good guardrails for us to work from.
Well said. And, just to reinforce your point, a lot of the for-profit slash proprietary industries innovation has been upstreamed across higher ed, starts throughout the year, really meeting working learners where they are. And of course, some of them are still going, although it's a smaller industry now. All right, credentials of value. I've heard that phrase a couple times. Texas is working on a pretty massive database, as you would expect in the state of Texas. Many other states are as well. Kelly, Connecticut, you've mentioned is. And we just learned, I guess it was last week, time gets a little confusing these days, but the tri-agency report from the Trump administration, the Labor Department has been tasked with creating its own credentials of value scorecard. So a lot of things in the works, but I think it's safe to say still probably, certainly at the federal level, a lot of gaps in what we know about the ROI of credentials, particularly short term. Is that fair, Mark?
Yeah, I do think that's fair. We've been working with 8 states. I think I've mentioned that as a part of the state non-credit data project, really looking at the data that they're tracking at the state level. And now keep in mind, within institutions, often there are more robust data on the minute things, but we look at the state level thinking that state level agencies are really going to have a big role to play here. And just to point out a few things, just really high level findings from our work. Generally, states have, across the board have data like contact hours, fine. But, we only have about half of states, not that our 8 are necessarily representative, but only about half of our states can match their non-credit or short-term programs with non-degree credential data. And that's problematic. Only about half can track students from non-credit to credit. Chandler, we always bring up Louisiana as one of the great examples when you brought the non-credit into the same data system. There are other models for that to work, but that's a really good one, let alone those non-credit to credit pathways like Kelly's been talking about. Only about half of states on our project can match data on labor market outcomes. Again, these are all critical to measuring the value of these credentials. And at the end of the day, I mean, value is everything, and that's what these guardrails are about. That's what individuals who are using their Pell eligibility to enroll in these programs need to be assured of. So, when we think about like what to do, especially around credentials, we think about states partnering with organizations like CredLens, who are working to build and match credential data, and other initiatives. And we also have seen with some of our partner states, these within state partnerships to match licensure data, state licensure data with the short-term training data. Again, all a part of the credentials of value conversation. And it's not just the credentials, it's also connecting training to the credentials of value. It's not just the credentials, it's the training and the credentials combined that really, speak to that higher ed ecosystem where this is relevant for Workforce Pell.
Great point. Kelly, anything you want to add there? And actually thinking specifically where you think the feds might be able to add some data that would help as your state works toward this?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that we have is really what happens to a participant when they complete a program. So in Connecticut, we don't have a way to tell if you went to a job training program to be a welder, did you get a job being a welder? So being able to have enhanced wage records is an important way for us to be able to look at long term. And then again, our community college system consolidated 12 individual colleges into one, and they are currently in the process of building out the non-credential database and matching that to their credential database. So that's another important aspect of all of this as well.
About you, Chandler, from the Fed level, or, as Mark says, tools like CredLens, things that you think Louisiana might be able to tap to make this work?
Yeah, I would echo that we know we are probably further along in certain aspects of being ready for the launch of Workforce Pell. We also would say that there are gaps as well. And some of that is the opportunity for our data to be connected at a deeper level where the accountability requires. So the opportunity that we are able to track some things that we don't necessarily track maybe that well today. So looking at job placement being one, or the earnings or the wages. How do we make sure that our workforce commission has better connection with the community college system from a data standpoint? How do we make sure that that's also connected in the jobs opportunities in which we're seeing across the state from economic development, to make sure that the programs that we are looking at that are of credentials of value align to where we see our state at today and the direction in which our state is going. And if our state is focused heavily on trying to solve our labor force participation rate, we can't do that without some of these systems and connectiveness that we need.
I want to stick with you for a minute, Chandler, and go back to a point you made earlier. You mentioned wraparound support, student supports. Maybe not all of the workforce credentialed programs, but I think it's safe to say most, if not the vast majority, are aimed at working learners, folks who are generally lower income frontline workers. And I think there's a growing body of evidence that folks need more than just tuition assistance to complete, to stay on track. And that takes resources. I think about, and there's some interesting experiments happening out there in North Carolina, tapping some private money from Arnold Ventures, a philanthropy, to help students get the sort of wraparound that CUNY has developed with this CUNY ASAP as they work towards high demand short-term credentials. So targeting it even to these programs. Um, what sort of need do you see in the state of Louisiana in terms of wraparounds? What sort of gaps do you have, and where would you like to see more help?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say up to this point, there's been individual institutions in our system or across our state who've probably, some have worked more aggressively at trying to solve the wraparound service needs or the onboarding into the institution and triage, in which maybe they're working with the student holistically from that standpoint, maybe like a case management approach. Some of them may not be doing that sort of same approach. Nothing makes it wrong. It's just they're identifying the best opportunity in which they're working with their students. But a year ago in 2024, when our state decided that it was time to come together collaboratively to focus on the labor force participation rate, we recognized that there are individuals who are not participating in the workforce for some reason that may be justified. That is the reason. However, there is a large number that could be participating, but they're not. So it opened the question of, well, then why are they not? What is the barrier to get someone to participate into the workforce? And over time, it wasn't about the individual learning. It was all the other resources and wraparound services that the individual needed to be successful to get to the training program. Our colleges had relooked at their schedules. Can we offer additional evening, weekend? Can we offer overnight programs to meet people where they are? And some of those schedules, can we go from traditional 16-week semesters to 8-week semester, 8 weeks in the semester? And our colleges have done that and pivoted where they can. But a year ago, we had a task force that was created, which was called the LOAS Task task force, which was the Louisiana Workforce and Social Services Task Force, where we focused on, is things like SNAP, TANF in the right agency? Does it need to move to a different agency for the collaboration? And so that will be moving from Department of Children and Family Services over to Louisiana Workforce Commission. Louisiana Workforce Commission put through legislation a bill that is now called the one door policy. And ultimately, people in our community think, okay, well, everybody's going to enter through that one door. And what we keep saying is, no, 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 everyone's going to exit through that one door, meaning all the resources that you have will be in place. So when you exit through that one door, you are successful to be contributing to get the job, get into the workforce, contribute to the economy. You're going to bring yourself to stability, your family to stability, all those things in which that one door is going to have all of those social services, wraparound services, transportation, daycare, child insecurity, all the things that we know individuals need successful in that one door approach. And co-location and collaboration. So we're trying to invite workforce development offices to co-locate to our institutions where they can and on campus where they can with our students. So an individual is not having to drive 30-mile radius 3 times just to get to 3 different offices for services when they're already strapped on resources to get there. And so those are things that we are putting in place as a state now and hoping to see major return on investment in the future.
Good stuff. So, I'm glad you brought up the labor force participation rate. Nationally, it's about 62.4%, I think, headed in the wrong direction relative to the rest of the developing world. I think it's driving a lot of the urgency around all of this. So I want to open it up for a last question here. Kelly, I'll start with you. But, obviously we have a lot of misalignment in this country between open jobs and workforce education, millions of jobs unfilled. I think the smart money is it's not going to get easier with AI and other tech-driven disruptions potentially to the workforce. What do we need to close the gap? It could be more money for wraparound supports, but what would you like to see from federal policymakers as we build on this development with Workforce Pell?
That's a great question. I think one of the reasons why I got into this line of work is because I saw all the silos that happen in the siloed funding sources that come together with many different program designs and a lot of special requirements around each funding source. And so it makes it really difficult for people to navigate through the system. So I think an alignment on the federal side when it comes to being able to have all workforce programming and grants come through the same funnel. We have so many across our agencies, 18 different agencies in Connecticut are managing 208 workforce programs right now. And that's because different agencies get different pockets of money from federal agencies or philanthropy that all come with their own rules and requirements, which then make them a one-off. And it makes it really difficult for people to navigate that system and for us to build economies of scale. So being able to kind of funnel those funds, and then the other piece of it and why Career Connect was so successful is we didn't put a million constraints on that amount of money that was coming through. We said the average person should cost around $10,000. That includes the supportive services. Some people got more, some people got less. But in the end, being able to holistically serve people with what they need to get them over that barrier is more important than putting really tight constraints on what can and can't be funded. The other piece is allowing some of this money to follow people into the beginning stages of employment. So if you didn't have transportation to get to your job training program, you're not going to have transportation to get to your first job a week or two after your job training program ends. So you got to be able to pull some of those supportive services into the beginning of employment, especially at those lower wage levels, to ensure that people can be successful there.
Thanks, Kelly. Mark, relatively briefly, what would you like to see from DC?
Yeah, I'm just going to stick with the data idea and think that there have been a couple times when we got close to having non-credit data collected in iPads, and I think that if we were to move in that direction where we had a federal data collection, we'd have more opportunities for to have more programs approved, create greater opportunities for individuals to engage in these shorter term programs, and combined with the guardrail that allows for stackability, we could really have these shorter term programs as an on-ramp to higher ed and to higher level credentials. But again, I think data will be a major enabler, and some consistency through federal data collection could help to grease the skids on that a bit.
Chandler, even more briefly from you, 30 seconds, so lightning round. Anything you didn't hear?
No, I echo everything that was stated. The last thing I would say is this work is just beginning. And so we're going to need to make sure that we get the additional support to continue these efforts, because it doesn't stop here. Whether that's data, whether that's wraparound services, whether it's additional funding, this is just the beginning.
Really well said. I'm going to, first of all, thank you, Chandler, Mark, and Kelly, and I'm going to turn it back to Cheryl.
Thank you, Paul. Masterful job at moderating. Thank you so much for being here and for doing that for us. And I just want to say to Kelly, Mark, and Chandler, what an amazing discussion, rich discussion, so much territory covered. Program eligibility, data, guardrails to protect students and the taxpayer, assessing industry credentials of value, importance of employer demand, and building talent pipelines. Louisiana and Connecticut are clearly ahead of the curve with a track record of a focus on short-term credentials. They've got the data, they've got the partnerships with industry. They're poised to sort of hit the ground running with this expansion of Pell, and certainly appreciate their perspectives here. And hopefully our audience learned something from you all, and we'll be thinking about how they're going to implement as well. At the top of today's event, you all saw a video that referenced the Bipartisan Policy Center's Commission on the American Workforce, and heard from our co-chairs, Governors Duvall, Patrick, and Bill Haslam. This event series that you're part of today was created to allow us to engage more experts in the Commission's work, dig deeper into issues the Commission is considering, and showcase where states, both red and blue, are leading and where we might learn from them, as we did today, as we consider a modern federal role across education and workforce. I hope that you all will stay tuned for future events in this series. In late September, we'll be back with a focus on K through 12 education, more details around speakers and topics on that to come. Thank you again, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.